Dust rolled across the empty main street of Red Fork in slow, swirling ribbons, stirred by a desert wind that seemed restless for its own reasons. The evening sun hung low over the mesas, flattening the whole town into long shadows and copper-colored light. At this hour, most folks kept indoors. The heat of day had faded, but the promise of trouble had a way of lingering in Red Fork long after the sun dipped. Windows were shuttered early, doors locked before supper. A person passing through might call the place quiet, but anyone who lived there knew better. It wasn't quiet, it was watchful. Down near the freight station, the air felt thick with tension even before the riders arrived. A few locals saw dust kicking up along the southern trail and peered out through slats in their shutters. Men who rode that hard, this close to dusk, weren't typically carrying good intentions. And these three certainly weren't. Their horses came in lathered and irritable, snorting against their bits as the riders jerked them to a stop. The leader, Graham Tate, swung down first. He was a tall man with a swagger that came from having bullied enough people who couldn't push back. He dusted off his vest with long, practiced motions, as though removing the day's grime also washed away the things he'd done along the trail. Behind him dismounted the Clark brothers, sturdier in build but smaller in imagination. They followed Graham in most things, because following him seemed easier than thinking for themselves. Graham scanned the buildings, squinting against the last rays of sunlight. "She came this way," he muttered. "She can't have gotten far," one of the Clark brothers said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We near ran our horses raw." Graham didn't answer. His gaze had already settled on the freight station, a wide, low building with stacks of crates piled around the sides and a telegraph wire humming overhead. A place full of hiding spots. A place a quick-thinking young woman might duck into if she knew she was being hunted. Inside, Chilali pressed her spine against the rough wood of a crate, breathing slowly to keep her nerves still. She could hear the horses outside, their hooves scraping against the ground, the murmured voices of the men who had followed her since noon. She'd hoped the station might buy her a few minutes, just enough to slip through the back and disappear into the thinning brush beyond town, but they'd ridden too fast. She had underestimated how determined they were to catch her. The pouch at her side weighed no more than a handful of stones, yet it felt heavy enough to anchor her in place. Inside it were the words of her people, messages carried between leaders who were trying to keep the fragile threads of peace from snapping altogether. Words her father had told her were as important as water, as land, as breath itself. Words that needed to reach the settlers soon, or there would be blood on the ground by morning. She closed her eyes for a moment. Not in fear, though she felt plenty of that pressing at the edges of her composure, but in focus. Her people had chosen her for this for a reason. She could not fail now. Footsteps crunched outside. 3 sets. Slow. Purposeful. Chilali moved farther into the shadows of the freight station. The wooden slats of the wall let in thin stripes of light, painting the dust in gold. Her heartbeat felt too loud. The men were spreading out. She could sense it even before she heard the first hand slam against the side of the building. "Check inside," Graham ordered. The door creaked. Light spilled in, dim, dusk soft, but enough to reveal too many shapes in the room. Graham stepped in first, eyes scanning with the sharpness of a man used to cornering prey. "There you are," he said softly when he spotted her. Chilali shifted her weight, setting her hands at her sides. She would not show fear. She would not let them see her shrink. Standing straight, she kept her chin lifted, her dark eyes steady on Graham. "You rode far," she said. Her voice surprised even herself, calm, almost cool. Graham smirked. "You didn't make it easy. Figured you'd have given up by now." "I do not give up." Her words were simple fact. The Clark brothers entered behind Graham, blocking the exit with their broad frames. Graham stepped closer, the floorboards groaning beneath his boots. "Let's not play games," Graham said. "You've got something for us." "I carry a message," she answered. "Nothing more." "Well," Graham said, "I want that message." "You do not understand it." He shrugged. "I don't need to. I just need it in my hands. Makes me look real useful to the folks who'd pay to keep trouble stirred up." Chilali's jaw tensed. Trouble. That was all men like Graham wanted. Fuel for arguments, sparks for grudges, excuses for violence. She knew his type from stories her elders told. Selfish men who would trip the world just to feel taller. One of the brothers took a step forward. "Just give him the pouch, girl." Chilali's hand moved to her belt, but not to surrender the pouch, only to anchor herself, grounding her fear into something steadier. I ride for peace. Well, Graham said, you're about to take a different ride. He lowered his hand toward his revolver. And that was when the door behind the men slammed open, banging hard against the wall. All three turned, hands tensing near their guns. A silhouette filled the doorway, broad-shouldered, coat pushed back by the draft of his entrance. The dust outside framed him like smoke around a campfire. Eli Harper didn't often walk into situations he didn't already understand, but tonight he'd followed the riders from a distance, reading their body language, their speed, and recognizing the shape of something wrong unraveling in his town. His voice was not loud, but it carried like a winter storm. That's enough. All three men stiffened. They knew the voice, and they knew the reputation behind it. Eli wasn't known for killing, but he was known for finishing what he started, and for drawing only when peace was no longer an option. Graham forced a laugh. Evening, Harper. Didn't see you there. You saw me, Eli said. You chose to pretend otherwise. Graham's smile twitched. This ain't your business. Everything that happens under my roof, or in my town, is my business. Chilali watched him, her breath easing slightly. She didn't know him, but something in his posture told her he wasn't here to make things worse. Eli stepped forward, deliberately placing himself between her and the three men. She's with me, he said. It wasn't a claim of ownership, it was a shield, a declaration, a line drawn in the ground that Graham and his men would cross only if they were willing to pay dearly for it. Graham narrowed his eyes. Funny. Didn't look like she was with you a minute ago. She is now. The room went still. The dust in the beams of light seemed to hang suspended, waiting. Eli kept his hands relaxed at his sides, but every man present knew how quickly that could change. He didn't boast. Didn't need to. Eli Harper could draw faster than most men could blink, and his shots were as deliberate as his words. You three are about one breath from making this a burial day, Eli said softly. Chilali felt a strange mix of calm and unease. The danger was still thick around them, but Eli's presence shifted its weight. She could almost feel the balance of the room tilting, three men who thought they held all the power now realizing it was slipping from their grip. Graham looked between his companions, searching for support. The Clark brothers didn't look eager. Fighting Eli Harper in a cramped building at dusk wasn't a gamble they wanted to take. Graham tried to salvage a shred of dignity. You willing to die for an Apache girl? Eli's head turned just slightly, enough to catch Chilali's gaze behind him. In that glance, something unspoken passed between them, a simple truth. She was here to keep peace alive. He was here to make sure no one crushed that chance. For her, Eli said, and for the peace she's carrying, yeah. I am. The freight station seemed to hold its breath. Before Graham could spit out an answer, Chilali stepped forward, surprising them all. You want my message, she said, her voice ringing with a strength she hadn't shown before. She pulled the pouch free from her belt, not handing it over, but holding it where they could see it. You cannot stop it. My people will meet with the settlers at the river bend tomorrow. They will know what happened here. The Clark brothers shifted. Graham's jaw tightened. She wasn't the frightened quarry he expected. She was a messenger carrying the future of two peoples. Eli stepped closer, his stance unshakable. Leave. He didn't shout it. He didn't threaten. He simply commanded it. And that was enough. Graham looked at the room, at Eli, at the determined young woman who had refused to break despite being cornered by three armed men. He spat on the floor, muttered something under his breath, and backed toward the door. Come on, he snapped to the brothers. Ain't worth the trouble. They shoved out into the fading light, boots thudding in the dust as they retreated to their horses. A moment later the sound of galloping faded into the twilight, swallowed by the vast desert. Silence settled again, softer this time. Less sharp. Chilali exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Eli didn't turn at first, he waited until he was certain the riders were gone. When he finally faced her, his expression was steady, thoughtful. You didn't have to help me, she said quietly. Yeah, Eli replied, I did. And for the first time since she'd entered Red Fork, Chilali felt the faint stirrings of safety. Not certainty, not yet. But something like a path opening where moments ago there had been none. Will you ride with me tomorrow? She asked. To deliver this. I'll see you there safely, Eli said, tipping his hat. Can't have a handful of fools lighting a match to this land. Chilali nodded, her pulse settling. The dusk wind drifted through the open door, cool and scented with sage. Together, they stepped out into it, two unlikely allies walking toward the horses, toward the long trail ahead, and toward the fragile, flickering hope of peace waiting at the river bend.